Good evening. We're here for our special May 10, 2016 Brattleboro Seletboard meeting. We convened the meeting at 5:30 and went into executive session to discuss probable litigation, contracts, and collective bargaining agreements. In fact, we did not finish that discussion and are going to need to return to executive session to finish that discussion, although as is standard practice, no decisions are being made in an executive session about those matters. We know that the meeting was officially warned because we did convene at 5:30. The first item on the public meeting agenda tonight is public participation. And I see a member of the Finance Committee here and a member of the press. I assume that nobody's got any public participation, unless, Mr. Reichman, you have something you want to add? Or Mr. Mays? All right. I will say under public participation that Ms. Hasbani's third grade class at Academy School did a investigation project to see to what extent services in the center of West Brattleboro meet the needs of the people. And so I have a series of letters from Ms. Hasbani's third grade class telling us about what students in the third grade at Academy School think about West Brattleboro and how it meets the needs of the people. I had a chance to go meet with that third grade class last week. They were engaging. They participated actively. They were interested in the process of municipal government. They were shocked that it's going to cost $1 million to build a new fire station in West Brattleboro. As a general matter, they were concerned about the fact that some of the sidewalks aren't really in good shape in West Brattleboro, and about the fact that traffic is just so close to the road in West Brattleboro. They were a little scared for their safety as they walked around and did their investigation. They also wish there were more restaurants and clothing stores in West Brattleboro, and I told them we really couldn't control that. But I really want to thank Ms. Hasbani and her third grade class for their interest in our town government, and I have their letters here with the kids' names taken out because we don't want the names in the public record. And I'm going to share those with all the select board members to be reviewed if you want to, and then the town manager's office will have those letters. So I want to thank Ms. Hasbani's class for participating in our municipal government that way. The next item on the agenda is for us to convene as water and sewer commissioners. So we're ready for motion to convene as water and sewer commissioners.
So moved.
We have motion to convene as water and sewer commissioners. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Everybody opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0. So our item on the water and sewer commissioners is to review the FY17 utilities fund budget. I expect, Peter, you'll do the overview, and then Steve will participate in that, and John's got the projection budgeting tool up on the screen here. So, Peter, turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'd like to make just a couple of short overview comments about all three of the budgets that are before you tonight, the three that are not part of the general fund. So we have utilities first, which is by far the largest and most complicated of these three, and then parking, and then solid waste. And in total, they're relatively simple budgets. Again, this first one I think will take us the longest time and be where there's the most substantive review required because of the variety of services that are provided through the utilities fund. But even there, what you'll find, I'm sure you have found in your preparation for tonight, is with a couple of notable exceptions that we will call out to you, almost everything is either a very small incremental increase or level funded. Most items are level funded, and some items are reduced. The one place where you probably noted substantial reduction across all the different parts of the utility fund and then also in the parking fund is in fuel expense. We're very happy to report that as much as we celebrated a year ago, $1.97 as the heating oil rate that the town was paying, we were very pleased to come in under $2. It was a joint effort with the school district, coordinated by the school district, but where John assisted to go out and do a pooled bidding process and get a great rate. This year, it's substantially lower even than that. It's come in at $1.58.
$1.57.9.
Yeah, $1.57.9
That's incredible.
for heating oil.
I thought it was going to go up.
Yep, so did we.
For the tens of thousands of gallons that we buy for our various facilities. So with the general fund already having been adopted, general fund budget having been adopted at town meeting, there will be a savings there, but that budget won't be reduced to reflect the lower cost than expected for heating oil. Here, because we had the opportunity to, we've actually lowered the amounts that had been initially budgeted for heating oil in all the relevant locations. And so the overall savings that provides is about $36,000, just over $36,000 in the utilities fund, and about $4,000 in the parking fund.
Well, don't tell Steve that because he'll want to spend it.
Well, we're not asking you to budget it. Steve and I and John are here to let you know that the request that's before you has been reduced by that $36,000.
All right.
So with that, I guess I'll just mention also the bottom line. We're happy to bring you a utilities budget that in total, with all that's up and down and flat, the overall total increase of a $6 million operation is a 1.5% increase. And in parking, it's actually a decrease of 8.3%. That's primarily because of a change in the debt service. It's very favorable. We'll talk about that when we get to the parking item. And then in solid waste, for reasons that you're very well aware of with the switch to every other week service and the reduction in the assessment at the solid waste district, we have a budget that's 12% lower than what was approved for last year.
We're going in the right direction.
So we are going in the right direction with those. So it's again, I think these are tight budgets. There's not a lot of different aspects to them that probably require a lot of deep review, but we're happy to go to any place you'd like to speak to any specific line item. And there's one particular spot in the utilities budget that we will get to as we go through it here in a moment, where there's a personnel funding change, and we wanted to make sure that you know that it's not a personnel change in the operation of the department, but there is a cost that stands out as an increase, and we'll explain why. But before we get to that, I think this is the appropriate time for me to ask Steve for any additional overview comments he'd like to offer regarding the utilities.
No, I think that was a good job, Peter, presenting the overview. In utilities, we've tried to keep the cost down. Again, a lot of these things have been in our favor. We are a big fuel consumer, especially the wastewater treatment plants, one of the biggest fuel users. But other than that, most of our line items we've just tried to hold the line on. So.
Steve, but at the wastewater treatment plant, wasn't that supposed to get reduced a little bit?
The overall, yes, but overall, because of the different treatment processes,
Right.
you have more engines, more motors, so probably dollar for dollar.
Right. So there was no savings.
So I don't think it was ever going to go way down.
Right.
If we produce more gas and could use a cogen,
Right.
that's still, we have some room to go to get that in full operation. And it comes down to the volume of gas that you have also available to make that cogen work. But you do have a lot more instruments running, and so it's hard to compare it to the old
Right.
plant
Okay.
because you have more of a treatment process.
Good.
As I was going through this quickly, one of the questions, or one of the things I didn't see here, is your budgeted FY16, which we are, and then year-to-date where we are. And so can you give me, after 3 quarters, where we are standing in terms of sewage disposal revenue? Because that was an area where, when I look back at, obviously, 2015, there was almost 150% overage of what we had estimated.
Yep.
And so I see 150,000 in this year's budget.
Yep.
So I guess a roundabout way, are we close to that number now? Are we going to exceed that number?
We will exceed it.
See that?
As of the end of March, we were at 165, 757.
You're at one what?
65.
Wow. And so then, one would say, when I look at your projection for this proposed budget at 165, that's a pretty, again, a conservative number when we're going to exceed probably significantly that and be closer to, if not exceed, the 189.
We agree. We had a pretty lengthy discussion of that in our staff review of the initial numbers when we were refining them and getting them ready to propose to you. The reason we stayed cautious with that is the clients that we serve with in that particular service had choices. They can take their material elsewhere. And we wanted to be careful not to be too aggressive with a number that we really don't control. We do believe that it's going to continue to increase. We know that we're going to be above budget this year and probably substantially above budget, but we think that it's prudent to increase in relatively small increments the expectation in a budget of what we're going to receive in that coming year, because if we overshoot for it, and if that led to decisions related to rates, which I know we're going to talk about before we're done tonight, we could live to regret it, and we'd want to be really careful about doing that, especially in an enterprise fund that has to raise the revenue sufficient to support its operations. So we agree with you that 165 is a very conservative number. We think actually, all things being equal in terms of the trends we're seeing, we have a reasonable level of confidence that a number more like $200,000 is probably what we could expect to collect in that area. But rather than put in the number with what we expect to collect and then live to regret it, we thought that increasing from the 150 to the 165 was an appropriate thing to do.
And I'll also add that in the model, even though we're conservative in this budget, in the model, we're assuming a 10% increase every year. So as we go out into the fiscal 18, fiscal 19, that's a pretty aggressive assumption to assume a 10% increase every year.
And all right, go ahead, Dick.
Has the model, obviously I haven't been around for a few years, has the model been readjusted in any way, shape, or form? When we did the pro forma, when we started the project, because I certainly was here, and I'm not sure,
Yeah,
John was here when we did the pro forma, has that ever been adjusted one way or another?
This year and last, we have not adjusted the factors by which the numbers are forecasted. But each new year of actuals, you see how the fund is performing compared to expectations. So we have the model up on the screen and can go through that in whatever level of detail you'd like to tonight. John mentioned about the factor that had been applied for the model for this particular line item was 10%, and that is what we're recommending here. 10% of 150 being 15.
Well, but I'm gonna jump in there and note that the FY15 sewage disposal revenue line was 71.8, and that was a pretty standard number for the amount of outside sewage that was brought to the facility before the renovation of the wastewater treatment plant. And we anticipated that we would be raising significant additional revenue by being able to take septage for treatment at the plant from local haulers rather than them having to go elsewhere. And so we did build in a very substantial increase between the 15 and 16 budget, 71.8 to 150, which is more than double. And so I agree with building in going forward at a 10% annual increase at this time, running through the length of the current ordinance, and then re-examining that at the end of the ordinance to see if the 10% will hold going forward from that point. But for right now, the 10% annual increase seems to be an appropriate factor, given the increase from the 71.8 to the 150 from 15 to 16, and given the actual current performance. So that's why, I mean, so there were changes in assumptions in the baseline, more than doubling that number. But Dick, go ahead.
I certainly understand that, but one of the things here is that when we did the wastewater treatment plant, we certainly knew that we were going to be able to take septage that we couldn't take before we did the upgrade. And so we knew that we would potentially, yeah, people have choices, but the choices are a lot further away, which is wear and tear, there's gas costs, and so we become obviously more attractive. And obviously what we charge, which is not part of this here, what we charge outside vendors to come in and drop their septage is also a key to us increasing revenue. Because if we start obviously charging more than they feel like they want to pay, then obviously they're going to go to, so there's an attractiveness. My issue here, well, it's not so much an issue, but making certainly aware that we're pretty conservative here, and we're saying we have a 1.5% increase. But what is I don't know what the rate increase is for next year for the pro forma. Are we at the 4% rate increase, even though the budget increase is only 1.5%?
Yes, the rate increases that were set out in the ordinance,
That's right.
because they were set out in an ordinance,
I-
are not affected by the budget. What we're showing here is our actual expectation in a restrained way of what we think it's going to cost to operate the utilities fund, and then a conservative estimate on the revenues. But the only way for the rate increase to be modified would be if you were to adopt a new ordinance that would change that going forward. We'd caution against that until that you get to a point where we have a full-fledged longer-term capital plan. So where we stand right now is we have talked a lot about building a better, more realistic multi-year capital plan, and we've made strides in that respect in what's before you this evening. We've got 2 good solid years in the first 2 of the 5 years looking out for work that needs to be done in the capital plan. It's about $1 million a year worth of work. Out beyond that, there's a few years where we're not as able to be detailed as what we need to be. We will complete in the work that we're doing now regarding the comprehensive review, everything both in these enterprise funds and in the general fund, everything that we do in town. We will in the next few months actually be coming to closure on looking at dozens of different ways in which we think we can strengthen town operations and finances. And one of those ways is to have for this utilities fund and for the parking fund we'll look at later tonight and for the general fund, real long-term capital plans. And until that is in place, I would strongly suggest that you not modify the rate increases, even though at this very moment, what was approved a few years ago is larger than what is needed to carry the costs of operations.
Well,
Hold on, did you want?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, that I think this is a good area to be conservative in. And the only reason I say that is because it really is affected by the haulers coming into us. And we don't know whether if they're going to change their mind, if they're going to find somebody else, so this is one that is really kind of we anticipated, I can remember setting it up when we first did the pro forma, and we had no idea what we were going to bring in. We had an idea, but nothing that gave us figures. So I just think this is a conservative, way to go without overreaching yet.
No,
I want to make sure, because just procedurally, and to keep the discussion clear, there's really three sets of issues that we're talking about. All right, the budget as a reflection of of revenue and expenses. That's one thing. The second issue has to do with how we're projecting long-term performance of the utilities fund in terms of long-term building up of a surplus, recognizing that we have big bonds that have to be paid off for the wastewater treatment plant work. And then there's yet a third issue, which is what should the water and sewer rates be? And I just want to make sure that, I think that's the universe of issues. Do I have that right? Mm-hmm. And I want to make sure that we're talking about those individually and focusing on each one rather than mixing apples and oranges. So, Dick, say what else that you want to say at this point, but I want to start by focusing on the budget itself
well,
after this comment. All right? So, go ahead.
my issue certainly is twofold, and one of them isn't what we're, the outside septage revenue. I think that's great. That's a plus for the users. When I noticed this, something I certainly had talked about when I was running for the office, one of the things that I had noticed is that there is a $250,000 payment into the general fund. And that's a $150,000 increase, roughly, because it used to be, we used to take out for treasurer and bookkeeper, $104,000.
We took out more than that. We took out,
Well, that's this line item here, says treasurer and bookkeeper,
What page you want, Dick, please?
4 of 5. And also, well, you would add in the dispatch, I guess.
There's
You could-
dispatch, there's
Dispatch,
public works,
garage
rental,
rent.
garage rental.
And so I was wondering, how did the justification come to make that number go to $250,000?
we did an analysis of the cost, time spent by the town manager's office, my office,
On page.
treasurer's office,
Well, you
dealing
were
with,
charging for the treasurer's office, and you're saying,
that's part of the analysis now, it's part of the 250. We've done away with, the treasurer's office as a line item, and we have one transfer that's based on the analysis we did.
and it's and you came up with $250,000.
Right, and it wasn't a great deal more than what we had currently been doing, when you add all those line items together.
Could you get me that number,
I,
please?
I can get you that number.
Okay, thank you.
Is there confusion at this end of the table, or are we all set?
We're good.
Well, I'm sort of confused.
Okay.
Because I see the 250 on page 5. So where's the 250 on page 4? Is it?
So,
It is, it's cumulative.
John, if you could explain the process by which we eliminated the dispatch and treasurer and bookkeeper and other line items. I seem to recall Patrick evaluating, working with Steve, the actual costs of what was properly allocated between the various funds, and then how did we come up with the 250?
I can do that,
Could you just talk to it right now,
talk to it right now.
just briefly?
I mean, roughly, that's 170, which you adjust those 3 line items.
And I think there's so we have dispatch, treasurer, there was a telephone line item in there. Oh, no, that was parking.
The garage rent?
Garage rent,
That was 52,000.
That was 52,
So that's 230 right there.
No, that's the number, that's 103, then you got you had dispatch, which was 20,000, so that's 123, and then the garage rent is 52, so you're up to about 175.
175.
So you're telling me that your time and the town manager's time is equivalent to about $80,000 in fees, along with Patrick, to this 250.
That's not what we're saying. Let me make an observation of what I was told. I was not involved in that recalibration work, although I was pleased to have learned upon arrival that it had recently been completed. And we did talk about this at some length last year. My understanding is and has been that it had been some time, some years, I don't know how long, that the town had been carrying the transfers and from time to time adjusting them in ways that were not calculated, where there were tactical decisions made from time to time, but there wasn't actually a study done of the actual costs of these things. There was approximations and numbers that were carried forward from prior years. And so what got done in, I believe, the fall of 2014 was a full analysis of what work was required. So it's not that there was the baseline from those items that were just named and then some additional time to reflect John's time or some additional time to reflect the town manager or the assistant town manager piled on top of that, but rather, starting from scratch and looking at all the different ways in which the general fund provides services to the utilities fund. And it wasn't just for the utilities fund, it was for the other funds as well. What would be an appropriate number to charge? And that sounded to me, in the communication we've had around it, like exactly the way to do the exercise. I will say I haven't personally gone back and looked at the methodology that was followed, but based on the work that John and I have done together in the last year and a half, and based on my understanding of how that exercise was done, it positioned the town to have a credible and defensible amount of transfer from the served funds to the general fund as the service provider.
Did that help to clarify for that end of the table what we were talking about? Okay, so
Page 5.
Dick, you've raised issue about the transfer from the
Last line item.
utilities fund to the general fund and an inquiry about the...
I was looking for the true justification.
No, I understand. That's one thing that you've inquired about. The second thing you've inquired about is the line item for sewer revenue.
No, I talked about that as more of a realistic number
Right.
when you're looking at the budget, not so much as, okay, this is here. So when I look at budgets, I look at the actuals versus the next year's budget and say, okay, there's a real discrepancy here. That's why I asked the question about where do we stand year to date with that number? And is that justified in that 165 number? That's all.
I totally understand. You raised that inquiry and that was answered here, and now you're
And
waiting.
I'm fine with it.
And you're waiting now for information about the transfer before the budget is finalized and completed. So just making sure that we remain focused on the budget. Are there other inquiries at this point about the budget as opposed to the projection of the long-term surplus or deficit or the rates? Other questions that people have about the budget? Do you have?
Not the budget.
Okay. So anybody at this end have questions about the budget itself? All right, so I have a couple of questions, and I want to make sure that these things are at least clarified. I think it can all be done tonight because I've already posed the inquiries. First off, one of the primary changes that we've made, well, one significant change that we've made over the course of the last year is how health insurance is being handled, in that we've gone to a higher deductible and we're paying money into a HRA, which is a health
Reimbursement
arrangement, an HRA. And in 3 of the 4 sub-funds, that being, I think, wastewater treatment, sewer mains, and admin, To a large extent, the increase in the HRA is offset by a decrease in the health insurance line, so that we're essentially level funding. We're actually saving money on the health insurance. But in the largest of these sub-funds, which is the water distribution and storage, we've got about a $25,000 increase in total health insurance costs, because it's $14,250 increase in the premium, and then $10,150 increase in the HRA expense. So we're spending about $25,000 more for health insurance, and there is $46,000 increase in staff salaries in that water distribution and storage sub-fund in the utilities budget. And I'd like you please to explain why, because that sub-budget is in fact going up 12.2%.
Correct.
16.2% of that is new employee costs, and then it's $25,000 additional for health insurance. So can you please explain that?
Certainly. So the overwhelming majority of the $75,000 increase in that area, actually $71,000 of the $75,000 is in those three line items that you've named. And there's really one explanation for that explains what's going on with all three items, and that is, a year ago there was an employee who was on long-term disability, and the salary for that employee was not included in this budget because he was receiving the long-term disability benefit and his position had not been filled. And that person has since retired, and we need to fund the position. It's utilities department needs to have that. Yeah, and I think you know that the staffing levels are very thin from the years of cutting that was necessary. And so so what this reflects is the $46,000 item is a small amount of just incremental increase in the cost for people who would be entitled to step increases in this coming year and that sort of thing. But the majority of that is the one position that is being put back into the budget after the 1 year off. And that also is impacting the health insurance premium number substantially. The one other aspect of the health insurance premium number is we had a different individual who retired, who was a single person with single coverage in the health insurance, and the person who was hired to replace that individual has a family. So the premium is higher for family coverage than it is for an individual, and so there's a contributing factor there, but the most significant factor is the position that is funded this year that was not funded last year.
Could I just ask, would it be fair to say that, as a general matter, it's better to build budgets based upon the staffing expectations and costs that we want to have at a full staffing level?
It is true. You want to build a budget based on authorized positions. I think the complicating factor for those who built this budget a year ago was the individual. It was there wasn't closure to the matter, and so the individual was in an uncertain status, was receiving payment through the benefit rather than through the budget. I don't know all the different factors that were considered, but the bottom line was that a decision was made that the department was going to operate without that position for the year, and so the budget should reflect that. It makes it now this year an anomaly that it looks as though we're adding staff when we're really not. The explanation is that we had a year when we were understaffed even more than usual.
So now the budget that's presented reflects the actual authorized staffing positions?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the other question I have about this budget, just to confirm and clarify, we have $35,000 increased water rents and $186,450 increased sewer rents, and that's a reflection of the increased fees under the current ordinance, plus any additional connections that are coming onto the water system.
That's exactly correct.
All right.
And if I may, this is taking a step towards that conversation that we're going to have that moves away from strictly speaking the budget and into the broader set of issues around it. But one thing I think is important to note is that even with those additional rents and even with the additional revenue for the septage, this budget actually is a deficit budget. It's a deficit budget that's in keeping with the forecast. So there were some years at the beginning that were deficits, and then as the rates ramped up, there's some years that are surplus. But this is a year when we're actually, by this forecast, anticipating using $332,000 of the accumulated surplus. That is less than what we had anticipated in last year's budget, and the situation is improving. But one of the things that we need to consider and keep in mind when we consider whether or not it's appropriate to make any modification to the increases that are scheduled for this year and the coming years in the ordinance that was approved is the fact that we're not yet at a point where we're actually contributing more to the surplus.
And so it's a deficit budget because we continue to pay off very significant amounts of money for the wastewater treatment plant renovation bond. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Yes.
Okay.
That cost will go down and the rates will go up, and over the next few years we'll reach a point where we're contributing to the surplus rather than drawing off of it.
Houston, we have a problem.
All right, so that's the budget itself.
Oh, my
Yep.
God.
I've asked my questions. Dick, you asked a bunch of questions. Do you have any others about the budget?
I just pressed that.
No, not about the, well, is the capital plan part of this discussion?
Yeah, sure. It's part of the budget, yeah.
So can we go over a little bit in detail about the capital plan?
Yeah, that's next.
Gotta start
Sure.
over. Gotta turn it on.
Unless there's other questions about the operating budget for the utilities. Okay, yeah.
I'm going to make a quick comment about the format.
Well, let me ask first. Is there anybody in attendance who's got a question about the operating budget?
Damn thing.
Okay.
I'll make a quick comment about the format in which the capital plan is presented, and then I'll ask Steve to speak to the individual items. I mentioned that the first 2 years are what I would say real, firm, accurate, complete capital plan. Well, they show you what we would intend to bring to you from here on in all the different funds of the town in a full 5-year format going forward. We will be there by the time we go through this cycle the next time, beginning next fall with the general fund. And so, so what you see there are, in some cases, specific projects, in other cases, categories of capital work, and the amount of funding that we think is appropriate and necessary in order to address needs here in these first 2 years. What you see in the out years is just the categories of work and some placeholder funding in order to keep up with a relatively steady level of investment in the infrastructure of the utility funds. So I just want to set that before we talk about the specific projects, that the progress that we've made, but the fact that this is still an incomplete piece of work, I think, is important to note. The other thing that we've done that looks a little different than what you've seen in the past, but I think it's important, is in order to not lose track of that work that has been funded but not yet completed, we will always show you this balance figure on all the capital plans going forward. So the items down the left, the descriptions, will always include things that are projects for which we're not necessarily asking for more funding, but where you've appropriated funds in the past that have not been spent. And so a good example of that is the Black Mountain water tank that I know Steve is going to speak to here in a moment, because that's a really important near-term project for us, where there's $1 million in the balance figure. We're not asking for any additional funding, but it'll be an important piece of work coming up.
Thank you, Peter. So yeah, I'll start right at the top, and I'll go back 1 year just so you realize the balances there. And the first one I want to talk about is Chestnut Hill. And this goes back, as some of you board members know, 2007 is about how far back that goes.
Yep.
So between engineering, state approvals, and time, that project has finally come to the front of the line. We've already been up at Chestnut Hill, and we've taken the grass area where the trees were growing up and the shrubs, and we've grubbed all that out and started to prepare the reservoir itself for some new piping. the piping schematic, which you recall has to have an overflow to still be a dam. We went through a big public process that we finally came up with a design that keeps that dam as it is. So we're trying to do the work, the most minimal amount of work we do without putting a lot of money into it. The 284,609, I suspect, is more than enough to do this project, and we're going to do everything we can to keep the cost down. The utility crews, our utility crews will actually install the overflow piping under the direction of a professional engineer from Du Bois and King who specializes in dams, and we'll stabilize that reservoir and just as we pretty much designed, and that's it.
Steve, was the state giving us any money for this?
No,
I didn't,
no.
but did we?
And they, you know, really the long-term use would be something that I can't tell you what it is now,
Right.
associated with the water department, but
Right.
it could, in fact, be a reservoir at some point if we needed additional
Again.
storage capacity in the downtown area. So
Right.
it could be used in the future, but the probability is pretty low right now. The Black Mountain tank, this has been going on for some time. This started many years ago with inspections. It's a metal tank that was put in 1965 in the World Learning Complex. It has been in service all those years and done quite well for a welded steel tank. We've come up with a specification and a design that will fit in that same footprint. We've been working closely with the town attorney, town manager to gain and have permission to do the project on the World Learning property, and they've been real great to work with. We suspect that this project's going to go out to bid here shortly, and then it will be coming back before you as a board to look at the bids that we receive. So that's going to be an active project that we really want to get done this year.
You'll remind us, please, why do we need to have water tank up Black Mountain, and how many gallons is it?
The tank itself is 1 million gallons. It was put in the 60s, and of course, in the 60s, there was a lot of industrial use on, that's when we were building Putney Road up with infrastructure, water and sewer. So this tank is designed to give backup water supply for large fires, large demands, water main breaks, and maintain pressure on the north end of town. There's only one water main that feeds from Veterans Bridge. So if there's a water main break anywhere on that section of that water main that feeds that whole Putney Road sector, the Black Mountain tank will indeed supply water to that zone for over a day or two. So it's a very important aspect of the water system.
And the welded steel tank is going, what's the current plan? Is it going to be rehabilitated with a liner inside, or it's going to be removed and a new tank put in?
The existing tank will be completely removed, and it's on a concrete pad, and that pad will also be removed. We did look at an alternative to keep the existing pad if it was in good shape, but it would void any of the warranties for the new tank, so we felt it was wise to go with a complete new package, so when they put the tank on a concrete pad that was constructed by the manufacturer, the warranties all go with it. So they'll actually cut the steel. It's in huge steel panels that actually have a curve to them. It's a round tank. And they'll actually just cut all those panels out and they'll dispose of those.
So we're not taking the tank down?
We're not taking, this is going to be 100% contract
Yep.
with and some of the smaller things, like we've done some tree removal. We've done that locally here. We're moving some utility lines, electrical, and then cable, telephone. That's all been done here locally. So we're kind of doing the footwork. We're the general contractor. Then we'll hire this out
Right.
to a manufacturer that does this professionally.
What happens to the 1 million gallons of water that's in the tank?
Well, that's a good question. What happens is we put we'll use up a good portion of that water, and then temporarily we put in what is called a bladder tank. And it's as small as a 16,000 to 20,000 gallon tank to supply a certain amount of water to that zone in an emergency. And then also we'll have a pre-plan designed with the fire department, so in the event that we had this water main break, for instance, near Veterans Bridge or something, then they would do an overland pipe to supply water to the facility. And also they'll have to do a backup plan for fire protection and sprinkler protection in that area too. So we'll have to work quite closely with the fire department.
Well, just to put people at ease, when was the last time we had a water main break out at that end of town?
We did.
I know, but it was a,
Just this, we had one at Staples here
Oh,
just
at
this,
Staples.
this winter,
Yeah.
yeah. So there are breaks at certain times there.
well, I guess that didn't put anybody at ease.
Yeah, that
Really
helped,
just sad, that's been
that helped a
years.
lot, John, thank you.
It means that the tank did
That's
exactly
right.
what it was supposed to.
Doing
Yep.
what it's supposed to.
If we
did.
need the tank in place.
Exactly.
That's the point I was trying to make.
And this next tank will last until 2060.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
The next item is $150,000 for energy efficiency, and this is, as you know, this is an ongoing program throughout town. And so the team looked at the utilities division and some of the areas where we could make some big improvements is in the utilities itself, at the water plant. So this money here is to be utilized to look at some improvements that could be made to make some savings, but also not to be taken apart later if we're gonna do an upgrade at the facility, at the water treatment plant itself. So there's some things, that maybe there's a payback that we could do on a short term that we would invest in. So that's part of a package. We've looked at this whole report that the team has come up with, and we gotta break that down to decide how we're gonna expend the money. But we felt it was important to have the money in the fund available, so if there's an opportunity to make those savings, we can do it now.
Can I ask you a question about that? How does this relate to what we just talked about at the last meeting? I mean, is this,
It's,
we just had these people come in.
Right.
The energy.
So the things that we can move forward with quickest are the things that are in these funds that we're dealing with tonight, because the general fund improvements we would expect to address in next year's budget and address with town meeting. But as Steve was saying, we're being careful to make sure that within the utilities fund, there wouldn't be work. For instance, we know that there's going to be substantial work required at the water plant. He's about to talk about that in the capital plan. So we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're asking you to approve that'll be for an upgrade of that facility. We wouldn't recommend to you the implementation of any energy efficiency improvements at that water plant, at the water treatment plant, that might then be sacrificed during the upgrade of the plant. So it would be, just foolish to spend the money, only get a couple of years worth of benefit out of it, and then lose it. So that's not the focus of this. The focus of this is on the variety. I don't remember the exact number, but it was quite a few pump stations that were identified as opportunities where, for relatively small amounts of money at a relatively large number of places, we can do some energy improvement in the functioning of those facilities.
Because I sort of got I think this is great if we can afford it. I sort of got the impression from last week's meeting, we're all like, well, we can't afford to do any of this stuff. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just sort of surprised. Because it's in the parking garage thing too.
It
Or the
is.
parking, I'm just sort of surprised because we really were sitting there going, oh, this is so great, we can't afford to do it.
Well, this is a down payment on making energy efficiency improvements in enterprise funds where we've got the money to do it.
Well, I just, I mean,
That's great.
I think it
You
is
want-
great, but I was just sort of confused because we were,
You aren't approving any particular projects.
Yeah.
What you're approving is funding sufficient to pursue those projects, subject to your later approval that it's the right thing to do. We do think that there is a body of work that is,
worth doing.
right, that is more appropriate to pursue in the near term with these funds than some of the larger scale projects that would cost a lot more money and be a more direct burden to the taxpayers in the general fund.
I just want to ask one quick thing about, and I wanted to ask it the last meeting we had with energy, the efficiency. Didn't we just put a lot of money into the wastewater treatment plant?
yes,
Didn't we do a bunch of energy stuff there?
we did.
That-
We're
that's-
talking water
We're
treatment
talking the
though.
water treatment plant,
Water treatment.
not the
Yeah.
wastewater
Now-
treatment.
And there's something,
Right.
they still could look at the wastewater. I mean,
Right.
we gotta remember, the project focused on energy efficiency
Right,
at the
right.
time, and there may still be some things that could be added there that at the time we chose not to. And maybe it's not used by this money, but maybe a grant or something of that
Right,
nature.
right.
This is a direct turnoff, a direct relation to things that we do where there's a payoff.
Right.
Yes.
So this is good business to have this money available to recoup those savings that we can experience from the plan.
And the
So-
wastewater treatment plant was not part of the energy audit, so that was not part of last week's report,
Right.
and it is not part of anything that we're talking about here in these recommendations. Yeah.
So the next item is $50,000, and that's for water treatment plant upgrading. And so this is Pleasant Valley Water Treatment, which is the main facility that treats the water for the town of Brattleboro. The facility was built in 1989, so it's in need of an upgrade. We had a preliminary plan probably 7 years ago, but we really had to shelf that to move forward with the wastewater treatment plant. So what we're looking for is to have this money available to rehire the engineers to come back and to freshen up the plans that we have, and take a look at it and start getting some ideas of what the cost would be to do some upgrades at our facility, whether we want to phase it in over time or whether it's a larger project, we'll see. But this will give us the ability to have some good numbers to come back to the board in another year. And also below that, you'll see with the water treatment upgrade, we're beginning, and Peter talked about this, in a responsible capital plan. You can start to plan for these upgrades by putting a certain amount of money. There's $350,000 here, and then we have $650 in the next year. And again, as we go out on the plan, we have a lot of work to do to complete a 5-year and possibly a 7-year plan, a capital plan that will actually show these numbers. But really, you need to start with the planning, have an idea of what the costs are going to be, and then you can be putting the money aside to execute the projects. The water mains and meters, that's a capital account that's used. The water main lining project that we talked about on Frost Place, that came out of this particular account. And the other thing that comes out of this account is the water meters are upgraded on a regular basis. When the water meters are replaced, it improves the efficiency and also the revenue. We have probably, I would say, over 49% of the meters replaced. Original meters were put in 1975, and then they've been upgraded in the 80s, and then throughout the 90s we've upgraded them. So we continue to upgrade the meters. It's a good investment, and there's a payoff for that investment itself. As we move down into sewer projects, the whetstone interceptor, and our town manager came up with this new phrase. It's tightening the main, which I think is good. The whetstone interceptor is a pipeline that collects wastewater, and it follows the whetstone brook. And the reason it's called an interceptor is because originally all the waste went into the whetstone brook. In 1957, we decided that we were going to capture all that, we were going to put a pipeline in, and we were going to direct all that wastewater through a pipe and then discharge it into the Connecticut River. And then later, what we did is we developed
So much better.
a Putney Road interceptor and intercepted all that wastewater. And then finally, in the early 60s, we brought that pipeline down and constructed our first primary plant. So that was a huge improvement, and it cleaned up the waterways. But now, as time goes on, 60 years, 70 years later, here we are, and we have this pipe that's in the brook, and it's pretty watertight, but not that watertight. More of the problem is water getting in, not wastewater getting out. We don't have a problem with wastewater getting out of the system. It's infiltration, water getting into that pipeline. And so what we want to do is each year we feel there's a need to go in and tighten the system up. And that can be done by lining the pipe, lining the wastewater manholes to make them watertight, and put watertight covers on them.
How big is that pipe, Steve?
That's a 24-inch pipe.
Is it really?
Yeah, 24 to 30 inch. So but that method works quite nicely. Years ago, when they did the Welcome Center project, we said if you want to connect 40,000 gallons of wastewater, because you're going to be in Guilford, you need to find 40,000 gallons of infiltration. And the first place we directed them was to the whetstone interceptor, and they were able to accomplish that 40,000, actually a total of 80,000 in the first 5 manholes from Main Street Bridge up. So, and then since that time, we've done quite a bit of work on manholes. So we want to continue that good work, and that's why this is being funded and looking long-term to fix it also.
Before you go on, Steve, I want to underscore that with two additional points about the interceptor. One is that this work, for the reason that Steve just described in terms of the infiltrating fresh water that gets into this pipe, that water then travels through this sanitary sewer line to the plant, to the wastewater treatment plant, and we pay money to have that gallonage be processed, even though it's clean water going in. So this is a really good investment. This $30,000 a year we're talking about is going to pay back in the efficiency and the lengthening the life even of the operation of many of the components at the wastewater treatment plant. So for that reason, it's we think a really wise thing to fund on a steady, ongoing basis. The other reason why is that the full replacement of the whetstone interceptor was recently estimated as part of some of the environmental work that's gone on in the aftermath of Tropical Storm Irene, and it was estimated at $25 to $30 million to replace this line. So $30,000 a year is a really prudent investment to just keep maintaining it in as efficient an operation as possible and create the resulting
How many miles is
operating
Well, it
savings.
goes all the way from Main Street Bridge all the way to West Brattleboro and all the way up behind Hayes Court, and it services all of West Brattleboro. So it's
It's gotta be 15 miles of,
well, it's probably 4 to 5.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
So
that's a good point.
That's why
yeah.
you see it now as an ongoing,
yeah.
forever
That's
investment
a
that
good
we'll be making.
investment.
Over time, that 30,000 will need to increase in terms of an annual increment, but we would expect to be spending some money, or at least budgeting some money for work out there every year.
Then as we go down through, now we get into the fleet, and you'll see that we have a utility truck, which is
So,
a
wait a second.
Yep.
You had whetstone interceptor tightening, and then you had sewer mains and manholes.
Oh, I'm sorry. The sewer mains and sewer manholes is a separate line for the rest of the collection system. So that would be to do similar work, lining sewer lines or manholes in the rest of the system. Thank you.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that was good. So the next item is fleet, and it'd be one of the service trucks. It's 2009. We're asking to replace that at $42,000. And then if we go down, there's what's called an impact hammer for the backhoe. The large backhoe has an impact hammer, which is used to hammer ledge and concrete surfaces when we have water main breaks, or it's utilized by both departments. The highway department, this is a specialized tool. It's a big tool that's necessary to perform the job, and that's $40,000. Portable hydraulic unit, that's a portable unit for our hydraulic tools. We have switched over to our pipe saw specialty tools. Pumps we all use hydraulics now. So this portable unit can be put at any location to pump out wastewater, or during a water main break, we have separate pumps that you could use this device for. It also, the pipe saws that cut the pipe, that's what that unit's for. And then there's a pickup truck, and that's at the wastewater treatment plant. That's a 2005, and we're looking at replacing that at $30,000. And that is the total utilities capital budget.
Peter?
One additional point I'd like to make about this equipment part of it. So because we're in the utilities fund and there's a relatively smaller volume of things to talk about, you see it on one sheet of paper here with both the infrastructure items and the fleet items. You'll remember from the general fund this year, we separated those into two separate plans. And one of the important things is about doing that is, as we go forward, the fleet part of it, which is mostly rolling stock, mostly vehicles, but in some cases, large pieces of equipment that might get, trailered or whatever to be used out in the field, but where the cost is similar to buying a vehicle, so you put it on the equipment list. You see here is a good example of where, there's a complete listing of the largest items, the rolling stock and a few of the larger pieces of equipment, but only a handful of places where you see money projected to be spent during this 5-year period. That's because most of these items are going to last longer than 5 years, some of them substantially longer than 5 years. So With the capital planning, we'll always do a 5-year forecast, and when necessary, we can work together with you to look at even longer intervals, but a good standard practice will be 5 years. As we continue with our work and we build the long-term plan for equipment management, maintenance, and replacement, that will actually look out farther, because we'll want to be able to show plans that estimate the expected useful life of something that's going to last for 10 or even 15 years. So we'll show you a longer term interval where you can see that, you know, some of these very large investments are coming, you know, many years down the road, and what that'll enable us to do as we work together to build that into something that's actually a equipment replacement program is keep our cost of that program relatively more equal. So if there's going to be a year when we know that there's a $300,000 piece of equipment that's going to need to be bought, you know, you're not going to put a lot of pickup trucks on that same year. You're going to buy your pickup trucks before and after that year, so as to keep a relatively steadier level of investment for the taxpayers, or in this case, the ratepayers.
Steve, can I just ask one thing? You've got a, and this is probably a wrong question, because I've asked 3 so far, according to the counter over here. You've got a 2004 truck and utility body that you have nothing down for the next 5 years.
Well, that's again, like, I think we're gonna be we're gonna look at this whole capital plan.
Oh, okay.
Because this is more this year with looking at building a 5-year capital.
Right, well, I just didn't need
And
to
so-
see a placeholder.
No,
anymore.
and there
You don't.
isn't.
Okay.
There isn't.
All right.
So that was a very good question.
Right.
I think I'm right.
Dick, you inquired about the capital plan. Do you have questions now that you've had the presentation?
No.
Oh, excellent. I just will ask generally, why is it that the 2009 WD-104 service truck is scheduled for replacement when there's many older vehicles, including like the WD-101 2003 service truck?
It's condition and that pipes or that truck's usage. We feel that's the one that needs to be replaced. It's the same as, you know, when we look down to the wastewater treatment plant, that's a 2005. That fulfilled its service with that department, and was able to go much longer. All the vehicles are used differently. The service trucks are probably, it's the hardest on. Those are the ones that go out and flush water mains and work all night and respond to water main breaks. So, and plus there's a lot of equipment on those vehicles, so the usage is a lot harder.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions about the capital plan from anybody on the board or anybody's in attendance? So we've been through the operating budget and the capital plan. I guess the question now is whether we want to talk about the rate tool and the projected surpluses and deficits. We don't really have with us this year the printout of the various yearly deficits and building into surpluses. I believe we don't have it because we would use it in conjunction with building the 5-year rate ordinance. And so we had it last year, and we've had it before, but we don't have it this year. But if anybody's got any questions or wants to see any projections with the rate tool and the long-term projection of deficit and surplus, this would be a good time.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
okay. What is the fund balance as we sit today?
Cash balance,
Cash balance,
6.2 million.
6.2 million. And where in the pro forma were we expected to be in terms of cash balance?
In this pro forma, it forecasts that we would be at
I don't think it was up there, I know that.
5.1 million as of the end of fiscal 15. We actually closed fiscal 15 at 5.6 million.
So one of my points that I was talking about, and certainly had a brief conversation with Mr. Elwell, is that I've heard the board for the past several years, and obviously when I was on the board, we're always concerned about rates and what we're paying and the heavy burden on the taxpayers. And even though this is an enterprise fund, the money comes out of one pocket. And my feeling is that with this surplus growing at a much greater rate, I wanted us to look at not reducing the rate, but freezing the rate for the highest 2 years of the debt service on the police fire station. If anybody on this board wants to hear what people complain about the most when they go and pay their water and sewer bills, it's the water and sewer bills. It's not the tax bills. And so when you have 4 and 5% projected increases every year here, and this surplus is much greater than the pro forma, I believe that the board should revisit the ordinance for the highest years of the debt service payment to look at freezing the rate, not lowering it, but freeze it at the current rate for 2 years of the highest debt service payment. That's what I was talking about when I was running for the board. And I think that there are a lot of people in town who don't pay into the wastewater treatment plant. They have their own sewer, or they have their own water, or one and one. But they get a benefit economically from the wastewater treatment plant because it allows us to attract business, which allows the grand list to grow. And so they get a benefit as the grand list grows, but they contribute nothing because they're not users. And that's one of the reasons, one of many reasons why I think that we should revisit this after you do some analysis about revisiting the ordinance to say, I believe that we can do this for a couple of years to help out the taxpayers in terms of how much money comes out of their pocket. They have supported the police fire station, police fire, and that's going to be a significant impact for several years. And if we're doing better than we're expecting to do, and I certainly am all for, forward-looking and something we haven't done very well, but I do believe that there's an opportunity here to have an offset to help the users of the water sewer, because it is a significant impact on the users with this pro forma.
So, Dick, you think the biggest complaint is on the water sewer end and not on the tax end?
Go down and talk to the girls in the office down
Wow.
there.
Just from the people I've talked to, I've heard.
I
just
certainly
the
have
opposite,
stood
yeah.
down there numerous times
Yeah.
when I've ran for office, but if you get down there and talk to them, people always talk about the water and sewer. They certainly complain about their taxes, but that's,
Either of you want to speak to that inquiry right now?
No, because I don't have enough information.
I-
All right.
Right.
Peter, you go ahead. I have a position, but you go ahead first.
I just don't know.
No, you go.
Okay. I think that taking the kind of look at what was adopted in the ordinance and what that was based upon in terms of the pro forma at the time, how we're performing against that pro forma as time goes on, I think all of that is wise to do. I think that's a appropriate step to take. The reason that I would recommend that you not take any action related to that for this budget cycle is in part the comment I made earlier about the fact that we've got additional work to do before we have a complete long-term capital plan in front of you, and we will have that by the time you're doing this work a year from now. We'll have it in advance of then. And in part because that will still be timely for addressing what Mr. DeGray raised about the goal of the effort, as he described it, which would be to make any modification that you might choose to make at the time during the period of time when it would be the highest years of debt service on the police and fire project. This year, as you'll recall, with the additional borrowing, it's gonna be interest only, for the first year, and so, it's next year and the year beyond that when those impacts would be felt. We have the luxury of that time, and we have an important piece of work we need to do, and so I think we ought to, go steady as she goes with this at this time, and if you're inclined to take a full look at where we are in relation to the model and give consideration to potential modifications to the rate increases going forward, next cycle would be the appropriate time to do that.
I think it's important to say that the board has reviewed the rate, this rate structure every single year since we started it. And one of the things I think that turned everybody's head is when you, and some of you probably remember, if you just change a percentage on this rate study,
Right.
how much it changed the deficit down the road. So I don't disagree with what you're saying, that you have to keep a close eye on it. We all want to always keep a close eye on it, but we have to be very careful about it because it's proven to be pretty good. Right now, and just aside, we've talked about the revenue, okay, from the septic receiving. As everybody remembers, or maybe everybody doesn't remember, in the beginning, we didn't even take that into a factor in the rate
Right.
tool because we didn't want to. We wanted to be conservative to make sure that it was going to be successful. Now it has been successful, but some of that relies on maybe just one client at this time, which could go away. And that will change that revenue as we look down the road. So I would just always say that we need to look at this rate tool because I think it's the best thing that ever happened to the utilities because we're actually operating this thing, with money in hand, doing things right. And I know that it's sensitive each time you change it, even a percentage on the increases. So that's all I have to say.
So my perspective at this point is that I'm in favor of moving forward with approval of the utilities fund budget without changing and considering changing the ordinance relating to the water and sewer rates this year. There's a range of reasons why I'm in favor of not changing that at this time. Peter addressed that in part in that the increases in taxes for police fire are small this year because it's interest only, and it's in subsequent years that we're going to be paying principal and having the highest bond payments. In addition, I don't recall exactly what the municipal tax increase was that we approved for town meeting purposes. Maybe it was 2 or 3 cents in that range. But this year, unless things have changed because of the state accounting for early ed services in the school budget, at least at town meeting time, we were anticipating maybe a 6-cent drop or an 8-cent drop in the school tax rate, so that even with the 2 or 3 cent municipal tax increase, we were hopeful preliminarily of a 4 or 5 cent decrease in the comprehensive, the total municipal rate, including both town and school together. And so with the relief that we're getting this year, if that actually comes to pass, we have opportunities for tax relief if the water and sewer surpluses remain on track. We can use that to help provide some relief in coming years. I also have some concerns about unanticipated expenses at this point. The wastewater treatment plant work is drawn to a close, but we have not yet finished work on the gravity-fed sewer line at Black Mountain Road, and there is yet some uncertainty relating to the conclusion of that project. And with that uncertainty and the need to build the long-term capital plan in the utilities, My preference would be to leave the rate increase alone this year, and then when that new capital plan has been built and that uncertainty has at least gotten closer to being resolved, next year when we're having bigger payments for principal on the new borrowing on the police fire bond, I think we can look to this as a potential source of taxpayer savings. So my preference would be to deal with the budget, but not to reopen the water and sewer rate ordinance this year.
On the surface, I think it's a great, it's a great idea. It may be a little bit premature.
No, I think you weren't hearing me, or none of you, or I think Peter does understand, is that I'm not looking to reduce the rate this year, because I certainly know that debt service payment is the smallest payment we make with the loan. I'm looking at the following year, or the next couple of years. I wanted to get this out on the table, because I certainly had talked about it, and I certainly have felt that with this fund and where it sits, I don't disagree with the chairman in terms of all the things that he mentioned, but I definitely believe that there's an outside possibility where we would be able to revisit the rate, and again, not lower it, but freeze it.
Right.
Instead of getting that normal 4% increase, that might be an or 5%. I don't know where we're standing in terms of the rate increases at this point. But I think I wanted to get that out. So I certainly am not advocating for this year. For me, it wouldn't be prudent to do it this year.
Well, then I think we should seriously consider putting it on the goals
Yeah. Yeah, I think
at
it's
next
a great
week's
goal.
meeting,
Yeah.
because we're talking about long-term financial planning
Yeah.
and including revisiting the water and sewer ordinance as part of the long-term budgeting would be an appropriate way to revisit the goals, and that would be a good way to keep that in our sights after the biggest laboring war on the police fire planning and construction has really unfolded, as we get into the fall. It'll be a good time to start looking back at that.
Okay.
All right, so are there any other questions at this point about the operating or the capital, operating budget or capital plan for utilities? Or any other issues about long-term rate increases or surplus and deficit projections? So just in terms of process, this has been a very detailed and healthy discussion about the utilities fund budget. My preliminary sense, given the answers we've gotten and the place that everybody's standing, is that with this discussion today, we probably could be ready to approve this budget at the next full meeting. And so I know that this isn't a regular select board meeting, and somebody stopped me on the way in and said, "Are you really having a select board meeting tonight?" And I said, "Do you really pay attention?"
And that was me.
But I will note that the utilities fund budget is available for review. It's been fully discussed here in open session for about an hour and a quarter. And I do anticipate that barring anything unforeseen, we will bring it on for approval at the next meeting on May 17. So we encourage anybody who's got any questions about the utilities fund budget to attend the May 17 meeting, or to address any questions to any select board member or to the public works director or to the town manager.
And the audience has been really quiet.
Yeah. So the next, we're ready. Is there any further business to come in front of the board under our role as water and sewer commissioners? We're ready to adjourn as water and sewer commissioners. We have a motion to adjourn as water and sewer commissioners. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0. So now we have two more budgets to look at, the parking fund and the solid waste fund. Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll do parking first. It's a budget where both the expenditures and the revenues are expected to be lower than in the previous year. but the expenditures lower by quite a lot more. And so we're in good financial shape there. Speaking first to the revenues, the main reduction is in parking fines, and the reason there is we just got a little aggressive. We, at the last 2 years, budgeted $210,000. 2 years ago, we collected $177,500. This year, we're on target to collect that much or less, but we've also had a extended absence from one of the people on that small team of parking enforcement. So there's a good reason why that occurred, but even being back up to a full complement of employees doing the enforcement, we think that the $200,000 is just a more prudent number than the 210. And in the scale of numbers that we're talking about here and overall impact to this operation, that $10,000 is relatively significant, about a 5% decrease in that item. So then looking at the expenditures, most everything is level, small incremental increases. There's a couple of notable decreases. Health insurance, for the reasons that were cited earlier, the premiums are down by about $13,000. The HRA expense is going to be about $7,000 for a net savings of about $6,000. The overtime item is substantially reduced. That's because a year ago we anticipated the costs that we would incur for overtime during the absence of the employee. And now that we'll be back at full strength, we've reduced the overtime line item back to where it normally had been at just $500 per year. Auditing is down. We didn't mention that actually in the course of the discussion about utilities, but it's down substantially there as well. You'll remember from when the audit contract was awarded within the last couple of months that we got a very favorable pricing on that with the new auditors. So that's reflected here. The fuel oil is reflected here. For the reasons we cited earlier with the great price that came out of the bidding. But the main item, the second to the last item on the line items of expenditure, is $61,175 decrease in the amount of bond interest owed. And the reason for that is, and this will be a little foreshadowing to the conversation that John and I intend to have with you next Tuesday night regarding the borrowing for the police fire, when we will recommend to you that we go with the bond bank option for that. One of the things that happens when you're with the bond bank is because you're clustered with other public entities that are issuing debt, and in that consolidated manner, we're all clients to the folks who run the bond bank. They look out for opportunities. They're in the marketplace and monitoring the marketplace all the time, and they're looking for opportunities for the benefit of everybody who's in any particular bond series to restructure that, to refinance that debt when there is a substantial savings that can be achieved and then shared with all of the clients. That happened this past year, and so unbeknownst to us, the bond bank actually had noticed that there was an opportunity for the bonds that our transportation center debt is part of to refinance that debt and provide a substantial savings to everybody who had been involved in that particular package. And the impact for us is a substantial reduction in the amount of debt that is owed by the town on those bonds. So the net total, I shouldn't say net, I should say the aggregate reduction in the expenditure costs for the town in the parking fund that's proposed is an 8.3% decrease, a $69,000 savings, $69,630 reduction. And so we would be happy to answer any questions that you might have about the parking fund, but we recommend your approval of it.
Questions about the current operating budget for the parking fund, Dick?
I'm not sure I ever approved a budget that certainly wasn't equal in expenditures and revenue, an unbalanced budget.
You would never see one of those from us for the general fund, but these are enterprise funds, so there is a net surplus. That means that money would accrue to additional retained earnings within that fund.
So my question is, when I look at transfer out, okay, obviously, again, I see that we've done away with dispatch services, which used to be roughly $5,200. and bookkeeping, which we used to charge them, and now you just have a transfer out of $36,000. Why are we not charging more money for rent for the space in the transportation center to the general fund? Or why don't we charge rent? Because it's an enterprise
Yep.
fund. We're certainly doing that with the utilities fund.
Right.
And why aren't we doing it here?
We are, but that's that process that John described from a year ago when the individual line items that related to the transfer to the general fund were zeroed out and it all got consolidated into one as a transfer out. The analysis that we did, we'll be happy, we have a assignment from you related to the utilities fund to come back and describe in more detail the methodology related to how that transfer was calculated. We'd be happy to do it for the parking fund as well. What happened was those factors that had previously been individual line items, as well as other factors, were taken into consideration, and there was a careful analysis done that arrived at this $36,900 number as being the amount owed by the parking fund to the general fund.
Well, you're talking about $36,000, and if I look at the two line items that I just looked at, you're saying to me, we're charging $10,000 in rent for that space. I mean, you had $25,000 of dispatch and bookkeeping fees, and this number is 36.9.
So let me, I'm gonna jump in briefly. First of all, I just wanna clarify which space we're talking about. So we're only talking about the parking enforcement
Right.
office in the parking garage.
Right.
All right, and I think what Peter said when we talked about the transfer out in the utilities fund is that it wasn't necessarily just those three items, but it was a range of items. And we will make sure for the next meeting to have available for the board members an explanation of the itemization of the transfer out for all three of these funds. But I don't think it can be answered in more detail right now.
Well,
So you want to know the answer, we'll
I
make
have
sure to have the answer.
I have our finance director here, and I think that question is, and the town manager here, and I'm asking a question of why there is, if any, money here for rent in that space. This enterprise fund is an opportunity to generate some revenue for the general fund. And so, I mean, this would be a great space, you know, to charge $10,000, which I'm looking at and believing this is $10,000 that we're charging them for rent. And I'm believing it should be a lot higher. So I will be looking forward to your synopsis on Tuesday night when we discuss this.
I just want to make sure that I understand the question. So when you say charging them for
Oh,
rent,
well, wouldn't we charge the police department, which it's our building, right? The town owns that building. Is it our building?
the transportation center
Yes.
is our building.
Is our building. And so we have one of our entities using the building. So clarify for me, because I might be a little confused here. So why don't we get more money in terms of revenue from the enterprise system coming back into the general fund?
Because, we will tell you exactly what the methodology was, because I don't know it, and I don't think John knows it off the top of his head, but we will present it to you for consideration next Tuesday night. The analysis that was done a year and a half ago was done explicitly with the intent of calibrating the appropriate amount for each of these different things that had been increased at times for reasons more like what you just described. This is an enterprise fund, there's a revenue stream that's sufficient there that we could put a little more over into the general fund, that'll take some relief off of the taxes. In some cases, that meant that there were transfers among that family of transfers with all those different line items. There were some items that were where more money was being transferred into the general fund than what was really appropriate or required to reflect the cost that the general fund was bearing for that particular part of the relationship between the enterprise fund and the general fund. And then there were other areas where either there was no transfer whatsoever for a certain factor, or where the transfer for that certain factor was lower than what it reasonably ought to be. The effort that was undertaken was to look at all of that and calibrate it appropriately so that it was reflective of, in the case of rent, what an appropriate fee would be for the parking fund to pay to the general fund for the use of that space. Now, I don't know exactly how that was considered in the methodology, but what we will do for you in the package for this coming weekend, so that we can all talk about it next Tuesday night, is explain how that analysis occurred for both the utilities fund and the parking fund.
Very good.
I also am having a conceptual problem here, understanding why the parking fund would be paying the general fund to rent space in a building that's used for
As a
parking,
parking facility.
for an office for the parking enforcement people. I mean, it seems like it should all be within the parking fund, but I'm just gonna wait and see what your analysis is.
And so I don't know for sure that rent is actually going to be one of those factors. That may be one of the areas where, in the course of the analysis back in 2014, they said exactly that, but yet there might have been other things that were underpaid, and so in the fullness of it, the calibrated number was $36,900. I can't explain to you right now exactly why that is, but we'll be able to talk with you about that next Tuesday night.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the parking fund budget?
Um,
Operating, we're gonna get to capital in a second.
Okay.
All right, I have real questions about the capital, having reviewed it to prepare for the meeting. So Peter, if you would please talk about the capital, and we
Sure.
can have a healthy discussion about that.
Sure. So here you see 3 years, and again, as Patrick Moreland described in his memorandum dated May 5th, a work in progress, steps towards having a real multi-year capital plan for the parking fund, but only a step in that direction. What you see as the recommended projects for the first year as the highest priority things, the things that would actually be funded and pursued in FY17, are $75,000 for resurfacing work at the Harmony lot, $30,000 for high priority repairs at the transportation center, with medium and low priority funding allocated to fiscal 18 and 19. There are a number of different things that need to be done at that facility to correct deficiencies and hopefully set it on a course for better long-term maintenance. And then $155,000 for energy efficiency, again in the same spirit as the conversation we had regarding the utilities fund energy efficiency items. This relates to estimated cost for items that are known from the energy audits, but it does not commit to actually implementing any particular project. What it does is provides a source of funding in a relatively more expedited manner, because we can do that through these enterprise funds rather than waiting until next year, which we have to do for the general fund. So it creates the opportunity to pursue the low-hanging fruit, if you will, subject to you deciding that that low-hanging fruit is in fact something that you want to pursue.
Questions about the capital budget for parking, Dick?
Yeah, are the walls in the Harmony lot considered part of the parking budget?
Which walls?
Where the artwork is on the walls, in the back corner where the new
Where the
retaining walls?
going?
No, where the new retaining wall,
Just
just
below it.
below it. Are those considered part of the parking budget maintenance?
That's a good question. I think there's a borderline call to be made there. So they're not part of the parking facility that is the Harmony lot in the same way as the travel ways and the pay boxes and lighting over the parking spaces, but since they're part of the physical plant there, I suppose, for talking purposes at least, I think you'd consider those
Okay.
walls part of the parking fund.
The reason I raise that issue is because those walls are in need of repair. And part of that is, I believe that the board should revisit the artwork that is on those walls. And there's never any money for perpetual care for that artwork. And so it fades, those walls are cracked, doesn't look very good. And I would propose that, and I would believe the Arts Committee would support this, is make that yearly. People could put their artwork, we would coordinate it off, and so you would end that perpetual care issue, because every year we would have new artwork along that wall. And so I want to find out if that's something the board would be interested in a larger discussion, if it's not part of this budget. But certainly how we would go about getting those walls repaired, because they need to be re-stuccoed, if that's part of this capital plan here.
I have a piece of information I'd like to share,
Go for
and
it.
then certainly I think it's appropriate for the board to discuss what you would like to see happen there. I apologize that I've obviously not informed the four of you of this, but at the end of the retaining wall project, the artwork on that wall that's down at below is intended to be freshened up. I've not been directly involved in the communication with the people who are going to do that work. I don't know exactly what is planned, but my understanding is it's not meant to materially change what's there. It's meant to give it the TLC that it needs, because it's been there for a good long time and is worn significantly. But Steve, unfortunately, is no longer here, but he's mentioned to me earlier in the oversight of the retaining wall project that as we got to the end of the heavy work up above, there's going to be some work down below to freshen up, and they're coordinating with, I believe, the original artist. If not the original artist, they're coordinating with some artists who would come in and do that rehabilitation of that area. So that's for now. That doesn't address the philosophical, forward-looking suggestion
Well,
you have about whether we ought to be doing something on a more routine basis there.
Well, and it's because of perpetual care and certainly monies, and so, if the way some of these walls get hit with the sun, and they really, obviously there was one on the Chamber building several years ago, which was a great mural, but there was no money for perpetual care, so it ends up really taking away from the facade visual that you were looking for, and that's what's happened in the Harmony Lot. And in my estimation, a way to address that would be to say, okay, we're gonna have a revolving, and have people, artists, and if we could come up with some money, a small stipend to help somebody at least buy their materials, you could have new artwork on that wall every year. And so that would address the perpetual care issue about faded artwork or design on that wall. So I don't know where that falls in terms of, I know that the artwork certainly would be a discussion about that, but if that's getting that wall refurbished, re-stuccoed, and then having a broader discussion about that, I don't know if that's here or in a regular board meeting.
No, the only question I had is, who sanctioned that work in the first place? I don't remember it coming before the board or anything, but,
It's been there, the books have been there certainly a long time.
oh, yeah, no, I know.
Brattleboro 05301, I don't know how long that's been
Right.
there and who sanctioned that. I certainly don't remember it, and I've been around since 2006.
Yeah,
And then there's some artwork that was done up above it.
so I'm just wondering if it's been
So-
freelance, I mean, is it?
That's right.
Do you know?
I don't know.
All right,
So,
so,
And the
so,
other issue that I do, Mr.
hold on a
Chairman?
sec, hold on a second. Yeah, go ahead.
Then the other question that I have, with the repaving, is that going to address the islands within the, or is that just strictly paving? Because the islands in the Harmony Lot certainly need some some attention.
Yeah,
And
this is,
one would hope that that's where,
I'll go.
where that is.
I'm gonna- So, first off, I think as part of the retaining wall project, we were clear, and I wanna just make clear for anybody who has any questions about it, the lower wall is structurally sound.
right,
So, although you've referred to it being damaged, there may be issues relating to the
think it's the
mural
surface, yeah.
being faded or peeling. But as part of our work on the retaining wall project, we ensured that the entire hillside was structurally sound, and this is structurally sound. My view would be that the long-term use of that wall for rotating murals or something else is something that really should come up at a subsequent select board meeting, because it's not really part of the budget, so, this parking fund budget. So, unless you've got some objection, I'd like to just ask to have that on a budget on another time. My recommendation in the first instance would be that you raise it with the Arts Committee, see if they've got some ideas about that, because it really does satisfy the definition of public art, and then maybe some collaborative proposal going forward can be presented that coordinates both what the Arts Committee thinks and whatever you've been contemplating about that.
And one just thing of that, this may be where the downtown, some of the downtown alliance money goes. You know what I mean, because it's a downtown design thing. You know what I mean, that's just a thought.
So if you want to spend some time dealing with Downtown Alliance and the Arts Committee to see if that wall can be used in that way.
The issue for me was the stucco, the concrete, that stucco down there. That's, I certainly wasn't implying that the wall was unsafe.
So let's just see how that plays out, but that's not for further discussion tonight. Then as to that paving money, there clearly is a marked division at this time between private and public ownership within the Harmony lot. And I want to further understand what the $75,000 is for, because if it's just for a single layer of tar to go down on the broken up pavement in the Harmony lot, I can't fathom why it would cost $75,000. So before I can approve a capital expenditure of that magnitude for work in the Harmony lot, I want to know exactly what it's for and where. So if you can bring that information back to us at the next meeting, I expect somebody came up with the $75,000, since Patrick appears to be primarily the first person responsible for the
right,
parking budget, if we can get that information.
we will,
And that'll answer Dick's question and mine too.
right.
We've had some discussions about the current state of the parking garage. I understand that besides the stairwell, there are other structural issues that are currently being examined at the parking garage, including the integrity of the rear wall. And I will say that for a 10-year-old structure, it's somewhat troubling to me to see that there's a need even to have high priority repair line item, and then medium priority repair line item, and then the need to put in $155,000 for energy
Oh, I think it's
efficiency
awful.
work for a building that's only 10 years old.
I think it's awful.
And I'm not sure that there's anything particularly that we can do about it at this point, but I would like to get a full report as soon as you're ready to give it to us about any and all issues that are facing us with respect to repair and rehabilitation and maintenance of the parking garage, because there needs to be a schedule for maintenance of that facility and upkeep of that facility. And I think we need to know as well as we can just what it's going to entail in the long term, because I don't like having to see all this money in the budget, $250,000 this year and next year, at the very least, for what's essentially a brand new facility.
And Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
if there's a way to also find out if there's any way to get back to the construction company or to find out if there are any provisions in there for, they must have some kind of a guarantee, and it's gotta be more than 10 years, but, it does seem like it's really, really falling apart quickly,
So,
which is discouraging.
so I have a hunch that we're ready for, is there any other questions about the capital budget?
Yeah, can I just ask one, this just pivots off of what you already asked about the Harmony lot. And I think this is what you were sort of asking is, there's a big chunk of the Harmony lot that the use may change, or you know what I mean? And and this is a question probably for Patrick, how are we coordinating with the people that are changing the use? Is there gonna be like a bump you go over, you know what I mean? So how do we make it
Right.
consistent?
So
Do you know what I mean?
there is travel area and parking area resurfacing that's part of this, and there is sidewalk work that's part of this. I don't know the full scope of that. I know that it is not a full upgrade of the lot. We've given some consideration to doing something that's a more complete upgrade of the lot, and that would cost far more than this, and so it's not being proposed at this time. It needs planning, and it needs more thoughtful budgeting. But there are some immediate needs there, and exactly what is expected, exactly what this estimate includes and what would be included within a $75,000 project, I don't know, but Patrick will be back tomorrow. We'll make sure that as part of your backup materials for next week's meeting that you see this weekend, will be an explanation of what that is. What is the scope of work that's intended for this $75,000, and if there was any kind of variable that was considered in the generation of that, well, if we did this, it would be 75, but if we did that instead, it would only be 60, something like that. We'll present to you more complete information so that we can talk about it next Tuesday.
Excellent. Any other questions about the operating and capital budget on the parking fund? So once again, my sense is that we're gonna be ready to vote on the operating budget for the capital fund next week, My sense is that we're gonna be ready to vote on the operating budget for the parking fund next week. But that there's a series of open questions relating to the capital, and we need more information. But it's not clear to me that we need the capital fund approval even before the end of the fiscal year. We have time to get that information, but the operating budget we can approve. Is that where everybody is right now? Okay, so we'll have it on the agenda for an update on the capital and for potential approval on the operating on the parking fund at the next meeting. Franz?
Franz Reichman from the Finance Committee. I'm not clear as to exactly who owns the transportation center, and if it's paid for out of revenues from the parking fund, but there seems to be some ownership or commitment from the town as a whole or the general fund. I mean, is there any mixing of funds there? I mean, for example, it relates to Mr. DeGray's question of should the parking fund pay rent to the general fund, but that depends on who owns the building, I guess. Right. So if that whole thing could be clarified a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I think that will get adequately addressed when we describe the methodology that was used for calculating the transfer, but if not, then we'll make sure that we expand the description to address that ownership question. I can tell you that all of the operating expenses are charged to the parking fund. So the everything from the debt service on what it costs to build the facility to all of the maintenance activity and the operations of the facility, all of that is parking fund expense, not general fund expense. So, but we'll get clear on this, particularly the question that's arisen tonight about ownership and therefore the potential that it's appropriate to pay rent, and how that factored into the discussion of what the parking fund owes the general fund each year for the support that the general fund provides.
And I'm pretty sure, Peter, that the parking fund, the asset, the Brattleboro Transportation Center is an asset of the parking fund.
Yeah, I am too, but we'll be 100% clear on that when we discuss this next week.
Right, but still, that's all just the town.
That's right.
I mean, it's the town that owns the parking garage, and it's through the parking fund, and it's financed through meter charges and other permits for parking, and then we pay out expenses for that. And the question is whether there should be some balancing between the money that's raised through parking permits and meter fees as against real estate taxes.
Right.
That's the question that's being asked. But it's all the town.
Sorry, but that raises an issue for me of, well, in that case, how come representative town meeting has no role in any of this? Which, you know, it relates to the charter, I guess. But anyway, if it's all just the town, I just haven't put together all the pieces conceptually in my mind yet.
Well, just to clarify briefly, we have 3 enterprise funds. That's utilities, parking, and solid waste. And those 3 enterprise funds, their budgets are approved by select board, not by town meeting. And I believe that's by charter.
I believe that's by statute,
By
but I
statute.
could be incorrect. It might be because of our charter, but I think it's by state statute.
By state statute, and the biggest impact of that, because parking and solid waste are relatively small budgets, utilities fund is a $6 million budget with a $6 million bank account at this point. And that's wholly managed by select board and doesn't go to town meeting for approval.
And one last thing, I don't know that this will make you feel any better, but it's an important part of the explanation for why these are treated differently under the law. It doesn't hold exactly for solid waste, which is a bit, it's in a different category, and we've been kind of transitional there. But it is explicitly on point for parking and utilities, which are pure enterprise funds. They are by definition required to stand on their own 2 feet financially. So they're operated, hence the name enterprise fund. They're operated as an enterprise where the revenue stream must be sufficient to support the operating. That's exactly why there is proper justification under the law to make a transfer from those funds to the general fund, is because part of the administration of both the parking operation and the utilities operation is what occurs in this building and in other support services that are paid for by the taxpayers. So it's entirely appropriate for these enterprise funds to pay a fee to the general fund and the taxpayers for those services.
Good.
Yeah, I certainly, rethinking my question with the rent, I don't believe, because it is an enterprise fund, they don't have to pay rent because it's self-funded. But if the debt service payment could not be met by the enterprise fund itself, that does fall back on the taxpayers, and so the taxpayers are actually co-signing the debt service payment.
That actually depends. I don't know the answer. There's a lot of good questions being asked that we'll provide a report to you to be able to give good answers to. Whether or not that's true depends on whether the full faith and credit of the town was pledged to that bond, or whether it was a revenue bond where the revenue stream from the parking fund was
It wasn't a
pledged.
revenue
And I don't know which. Do you?
It's a general obligation.
It is a general obligation bond, so it is the taxpayers who are the
That's right.
underwriters ultimately.
That's right.
Yeah.
But then we wind up avoiding that risk of having to pay for the bond to build the transportation center through our real estate taxes by the potential for raising parking permit fees and meter
right.
fees, so that the enterprise fund continues to stand on its own 2 feet.
That's right.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the wastewater treatment facility bonds.
Exactly.
It's $30 million in bonds,
Right.
and the full faith and credit of the town is pledged to support it, but we raise water and sewer rates, and we charge water and sewer rates enough to make sure that we can always pay it off. All right, solid waste disposal fund, much more a compact budget.
Yes, it is.
This is my fault.
So this one is down 12%. This one is balanced because there is the transfer in. There's no transfer out, so there's no calibration of a transfer to the general fund for this, because this one actually does lean on the general fund for the transfer. that this year is reduced. Last year it went from almost $1 million down to 555. This year it's down to 397. The bag revenue is now the largest source of revenue for the fund, increasing to $430,000 in this year's budget. So that's a 12% increase in bag revenue, not because of an increase in fees, but because of an increase in actually a more educated number based on what bag sales have actually been producing in this fiscal year compared to the 385 that was budgeted. And then the resulting, because the costs are down substantially and the bag revenue is increased, the transfer in from the general fund is reduced by 28% in this proposed budget, reducing by over $150,000 down to 397. On the expenditure side, the refuse collection is down 46%. That's a number that you knew was going to happen. That's a $114,000 reduction, and directly related to reducing the frequency of curbside collection to once every other week. So you've seen that figure in the earlier decision-making process for that policy decision. There's a small decrease in recycling collection costs. There's a almost 20,000, 19,250 reduction in the assessment. That's again the solid waste assessment, solid waste district assessment, and that was a number that we knew was going to be happening when we adopted the general fund budget and the transfer amount. And so the overall impact, you see the other line items there, the overall impact is a reduction of $112,800 in the expenses of this fund, a 12% reduction from last year's budget. We'll note that there is some uncertainty going forward based on not only recent events and communication with the district, but things we've known about for months, back to December when the town asked for and the district agreed to convene a committee to look at a fee-for-service system rather than a pure assessment system. That work is ongoing. There's been some good work done by the committee, and they're getting closer to the end than to the beginning of their work. I don't know whether or not we'll see a final product in June as we had requested. But certainly in the weeks ahead, there will be a final report coming out of that. There will be decisions to be made about the recycling program, and both at the district level and at the town level. And to the degree that those issues have some impact on the actual operating costs and revenues for this fund, I don't think we know enough at this moment to make any modifications to this based on any clear expectation of how any of that might turn out. So there is the possibility with this particular fund, this particular set of services, that we may encounter a year when there's going to have to be more substantial change in midstream than what we prefer to do, and certainly what we usually experience. But for now, staff is comfortable making the recommendation that you approve this budget as proposed because it's the best we can do with the knowledge that we have at this time.
We're gonna have a better idea in the next 3 or 4 months.
I thought we were going in June.
And June, I know, I'm
Well,
giving them a little.
We requested for June.
Right.
It sounds like it's very substantial, potential transition for the district. We're hopeful that we'll get the answer in June. If we don't have the answer in June, we will inquire about real anticipated timeframe, because we do not want to be getting the information in November.
Not
Well,
November,
that's-
no.
That would be unacceptable.
It would be, July would almost be unacceptable.
Right, but meanwhile, we're going to anticipate that the study of the district's operations continues on schedule, and that we're gonna have the data we asked for in the June timeframe. We have previously noted that the town is looking into its alternatives for disposal of recycling. And all of those things currently are in the mix. And I think what the town manager said is that this budget is
Right,
the best currently available information about what it's gonna cost to
right.
dispose of garbage, recycling, and compost next year, recognizing that it could all turn on a dime in
2 months.
Any day. Any day.
Any day.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
And I don't know that, I cannot remember when we started the recycling. All I know is I've used 5 bags since we started. I can't remember when I bought my first bag. Are we just assuming, and again, this is the timing thing, we're increasing the bag sales
Yes.
between this year? Is that because FY16 wasn't a full year of selling bags, or?
No, it's not. It's because we really didn't have a basis for making a good educated guess. We did the best we could at identifying a number that was a reasonable expectation for what the bag revenue would yield. Turned out to be pretty accurate, but a little low. And so we think the 430 is a solid number based on actual experience this year.
Don't you think and again, this is maybe, don't you think the bag sales would actually go down if people are recycling and composting more? You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
why are we gonna buy, people buying more bags if they're recycling and composting more?
So if we see substantial increase in the volume of recycling and compost, I think that's a good point, and we could end up short here. What we've seen so far is already a substantial increase in that based on just switching to pay as you throw. So the every other week, we see an opportunity to go to every other week because there is so much less garbage
Right, so
being
less
thrown away.
bags.
So while we hope to get some segments of the community involved in the recycling and compost to a greater degree than they've been in the past, I think that the amount of increase in those two components and decrease in garbage going forward is likely to be a lot less dramatic than what we saw last summer when we switched over to pay as you throw. Having said that, if it turns out that there is another dramatic increase in the diversion of materials over to compost and recycling, we could end up short on the bag number.
I'd like to see a short on the bag number.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I would think the bag would
absolutely.
either stay the same or go
Right,
down,
right.
as opposed to we'd sell more bags.
Well, let's
Well,
sell some bags.
Well, this
But-
isn't selling more bags. This is
That's
just,
right.
I mean, you'll recall that
Well,
you'll recall that when we were building this budget a year ago, we relied on John's ESP.
And with zeros.
And he actually did a remarkable job
Yes.
predicting the future.
So you're
Saying-
saying we're in FY16, we're closer to 430?
Absolutely.
Because we don't have the actual number here.
Right.
We don't.
So we're not really, actually maybe
Because
going
we're
up.
a couple
because-
months
We're,
behind.
right, no,
Yeah.
what
Right,
430
right.
represents is a level expectation.
Okay.
If we just continue on with what our experience has been so
Right.
far, we think
Right.
430 is a reasonable number.
So that means we should be right around 360 now.
We're through 8 months of the year, we're at 276.
Oh. Well, that's right, that's only 8 months.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so that's gonna come right out around 410 or 420.
Right.
What is town dumpsters?
Town dumpster,
Town dumpsters are the dumpsters at our various facilities. So now our rate, what we pay for solid waste services reflects a specific charge for the collection from those dumpsters, where it used to be just folded into the overall charge.
And our town facilities similarly recycle and compost?
We recycle extensively in our town facilities. I don't know whether there's any composting done at any of the town facilities. We don't do that here in this building.
Okay.
It's probable that at the fire stations, they do composting. I don't know 100% for sure.
I don't know, when we do the breakfast, it's not clear. We have to compost over there, everything in the trash. Although John's good in the kitchen, you know.
yeah.
Anything else about the solid waste budget? All right, so I think similarly, we're gonna be ready to consider and approve the solid waste budget at the meeting on the 17th, unless something changes between now and then.
May I just Gore, I think there's 3 things that we're gonna owe you in Friday's package. I'd
Yep.
like to make sure that we're clear on that. So the methodology for the utilities transfer to the general fund, the methodology for the parking transfer to the general fund, and the scope of the Harmony Lot plans and an explanation of how the estimate was generated.
That's for this meeting, and then we wanted more information about
Yes.
the parking garage.
Going forward to a future meeting, there would be a full update on the condition of the transportation center and
Ownership.
the program for fixing what needs fixing and then maintaining it in the longer term. And there'd also be, actually, this will be for next week as well, adding the water and sewer ordinance review to the select board goals. And then
Mural maintenance, me later.
the mural maintenance at the Harmony Lot for some future time after the Arts Committee has weighed in.
And you'll be able to speak to the ownership of the parking garage at the next meeting when we talk about the methodology.
Sure,
for the transfer of the parking fund. I think
As
we
we've been
already
sitting
know
here
what it
tonight, I
is.
think we really got to the bottom line of that, but John and I will just double check ourselves and make sure that there's no degree to which the general fund has paid for the asset down there.
Great. Is there any further business to come in front of the meeting during public session? We have 10 more minutes worth of executive session work that didn't get done before we convened. So I want to thank BCTV operator and member of the press who's been here, and member of the public who's been here, and everybody who's been watching us on TV, whether live or recorded. And we're going to go into executive session, and we will rise from executive session and adjourn without conducting any further business and without making any decisions, either in executive session or in a public meeting when we come back out of executive session. So we want to say good night.
Do you want to meet?
Thanks for everybody whose attention was given to the meeting. And I move to re-enter executive session to discuss collective bargaining agreements where the select board has determined that premature general public knowledge would clearly place municipalities, select board, and people involved at a substantial disadvantage, and I invite the town manager into the executive session. That being a procedural motion, there's no discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed or abstaining, that carries 4-0. Thank you and good night.